Hi, welcome back to the Knitweekend podcast. Today we are talking about knitting ruts, what causes them and how to get out of them. Hope you'll join me. So this is not your normal whip update. This video is quite honestly just a little more like off the cuff and from the heart than those types of videos. I have an extra day off work today. I am plugging away on my I-cord for my artist shawl, which is the entire length of the, oh, that's backwards for you. Well, anyway, I'll show you the reveal on the April whip update. This is just a teaser. So I got to thinking today, because I feel one coming on, about knitting ruts. And I think we all go through them. If you haven't yet, you probably are relatively new to knitting and still like completely jazzed to be learning. And there will be one probably in your future. And this video, like I've mentioned in some of my other kind of special topic videos, this is meant to be a forum, a space for you to share, me to share, us to discuss, read each other's comments, respond to each other, offer support, offer advice. I think for me, because I spend so much time knitting and it has become so much a part of my identity, frankly, to my friends and family and to myself, that you know, I want to be happy in it. It's my hobby. I want it to bring me joy. And there are moments when it frankly doesn't. And when that happens, it's easy to get really like disheartened and not feel engaged in it. And those are the times where I'll find myself like pull away. So you may not get a podcast as frequently from me, or I may not engage as much with other podcasters, which, as a side note, those things really don't help. Going into your shell really does not help pull you out of a place of knit despondency, speaking from personal experience there. First of all, I'm going to kind of share some things that I find to trigger knitting ruts for myself, and then things that I do to get out of those. The reason that I think I'm probably feeling a bit of a knitting rut come on right now is that I am still working on a winter, I showed you. I'm still working on a winter project that it is spring outside and it is spring outside, and I know that I won't really be able to wear this until the fall. That is just so kind of frustrating and dissatisfying that I haven't managed to get it done in time to wear it this year. But I'm going to continue plugging along on it so that I can have it ready for the fall. The good news is that in that kind of thinking through that knitting rut feeling, we get a little extra content, right? Okay. Some reasons that I tend to wind up in knitting ruts, and I kind of jotted them down, so if I'm looking over here, that's why. When I know my project isn't right, if I know that my project isn't right for me, if I end up feeling like it's not fitting properly, I'm not going to wear it. I think of my Cumulus tee from last April, around this time of year last year. I was working on a Cumulus tee, and I knew the entire time I was knitting it that it was not right. I did not think it was going to fit, and I did what I call wishful knitting and just kept on going. And by the end of that Cumulus tee, I was in such a rut. I was so burnt out. Yeah, it was not fun. So if I know the project isn't right, I'm probably gonna have that knitting rut kind of feeling. Reason number 2 is if I'm not enjoying the yarn. I am a knitter who loves to work with interesting yarns. The yarn has to be engaging to me. I need it to not be too bland, or if it is bland, I need to be using it in an interesting way. And if I'm not enjoying working with the yarn, and I think of like a 100% Pima cotton, for example, I can't If you love it, I support you in that love, but for me, it is a yarn that I've tried to knit with a couple times and I end up just being so unhappy while I am knitting it. The third reason is my project is taking too long. This can be for any number of reasons. This project is taking a long time because I have been knitting so many other things alongside it. And I started it in December. It is now March 22nd. And I am still not done. I'm close, but I'm not there. So now the season has shifted. The project has taken too long and I am just like ready to be done with it. The fourth thing that tends to end me in a knitting rut is when I have not had a finished object in quite some time. When I think of an instance like this, in December of 2022, I guess, I started knitting the Urus sweater. It is a gorgeous sweater. It is a tour de force, and it meant that I knitted on it pretty much monogamously, and it meant that I did not have a finished object for I think 2.5 months. In January, I was knitting on it and seeing everybody come across with these finished objects, and I was just like vibrating with the need to have a finished object and feeling really despondent that I had not. So I have learned for myself that that finished object feeling, that's the endorphin. So every now and again, I need that to avoid a knitting rut. And the fifth one is something that I do often struggle with, which is I don't know what to knit next. When I don't know what to knit next, when I finish my projects, I have no whips and I am stuck. I've got yarn and stash that I want to use. I can't figure out what to use it for, or I've started swatching for something and it's just not swatching up the way that I wanted it to, and I don't know what to do next. I am the type of person that really needs to finish up one project and immediately have something else to come in behind it. I don't like that moment of not knowing where to go. So those are my 5 things that tend to lead to knitting ruts for me personally. I'm curious, have you experienced any of those things? How have you dealt with them? We'll talk about in a minute how I've dealt with them. And are there other things that you find kind of leaving you feeling like you're headed toward a knitting rut? I wonder, do you feel that coming on, or is it something that like just kind of pops out of nowhere and all of a sudden you have this knit despondency? Anyway, there are some things that I tried to do to bring myself out of my knitting ruts. And the first thing is honestly, put down the needles. If I, for the most part, this is not my job. I don't have to knit. For the most part, I'm not on a deadline. The occasional test knit, but nothing too strict, nothing too crazy. So it's not going to hurt for me to put the needles down on a project. I don't like to put them down for too long. So it will either be like overnight if I'm just in a like bad mood for that piece of the project, then I'll put it down overnight, come back to it the next day with a fresh brain and not feel kind of as down in the dumps about it. Or one thing that I've been doing lately that I've really enjoyed is I've had one project for my weekdays and one project for my weekends. So this has been my weekend project. And I have to say that the past 2 weekends of me doing that, I have actually really looked forward to picking it back up again. And then likewise, when Monday rolls around and I get back to my weekday project, I've looked forward to that as well. So kind of switching it up, putting the needles down on one thing and picking up the other thing, or frankly, putting the needles down altogether. Don't knit for the rest of the day. Just see how that feels. And maybe you'll come back and actually miss it the next morning. If it's something that I'm doing just because I feel like I have to do it, that's a really good sign that I'm not in the right brain space for it. So this is a hobby for most of us. Some of us it's our job, but most of us it's a hobby, and it's meant to be enjoyable. The next thing, and this has to do more with the first thing that I mentioned, which was the project isn't right. Well, actually the next two things that I do to get myself out of knitting ruts when the project isn't right. Number one, or number, oh, my numbers, too many numbers. We're doing too many numbers. Anyway, listen, fix it. That's another thing that I tend to do to get myself out of a knitting rut. If I am knitting something and I know that it's not right and I can fix it, then I do. So let's say I look back 20 rows ago and maybe I purled instead of knitted, or knitted instead of purled, or I crossed that cable wrong or whatever. And it is just putting me in a bad mood and putting me in a funk. Then just either frog that section or drop those stitches down, make that correction. It will free up your brain space for the rest of the project to be able to carry on in a better mindset. And then you're not going to stare at it for the rest of the eternity that you have this project. And if that doesn't fix it, if fixing it doesn't fix it, fix it. Fix the knitting rut. If fixing your project doesn't fix the knitting rut, you know what? If you're still not happy with that project, tough love words are about to come out of my mouth. Frog it. Frog it. Relieve your brain of that brain space and just admit that this was not right. Either the yarn wasn't right, or the project wasn't right, or God forbid you had, like, I think I've seen a couple folks recently, podcasters, have mixed dye lots in their projects accidentally. If you know it's not right and you know it's not going to get right, then just frog it, relieve yourself, move on, do something that brings you more joy. And then for projects that are taking too long, one of my secret sauces there is to start swatching. This also helps with the not knowing what to knit next. So, well, that's assuming that you do swatch. I swatch. I'm an ardent swatcher. You need to know this about me if you're going to hang out on this channel. Big swatcher. So, for example, if I am knitting a sweater and I have, typically I kind of knit the sweater in, I'll knit a portion of the body to a little bit under the underarm. Then I will come back and knit the sleeves, and then not to the full length, but like just to the rib. Ooh, there's an end I haven't woven in. I won't usually put the cuff on. I'll just knit the length of the sleeve to where I think that I want it. I'm gonna put the collar in, and then I can judge the final length of the sleeve and also the final length of the body. So for me, the bottom of the body is typically one of the last things that I'm going to knit. And that's for many reasons, which I'll get into in another video, which aren't really meant for this video. But once I've done that and I am well into the body of a stockinette sweater, I'm pretty well starting to swatch for my next project. I find that that allows me to kind of have a little bit of a breather without an immediate other cast on and end up with 500 whips on my needles. And it allows me to have something ready to roll when I wrap this sweater up. So, for example, I may have to do, I don't know, to get gauge. I never get gauge on the first swatch. That just has maybe happened one time ever. So I typically do 2 to 3 swatches, and that starting the swatch in the middle of my body of my current project allows me the time to swatch and re-swatch and get it right without feeling the pressure of, oh my gosh, I'm almost done. I don't know what to knit next. When I have that pressure is when I start having a lot of despondency in my knitting. And then the last thing that I like to avoid, a knitting rut is an easy win. I was watching the Knitting Posse this morning, and a couple of those ladies were talking about this. When you don't really know where to turn next, or your project is taking too long, or you feel like you've had a couple failures, give yourself an easy win. For me, this is going to be a small scarf or a beanie or just something completely whimsical. Lately, I'm seeing the emotional support chicken, and I think that would be a fabulous easy win. So those are some ways that I get myself out of a knitting rut. I am super interested to hear about your tricks for getting out of a knitting rut. Do you do any of these things? What else do you do? And if you've never experienced a knitting rut, how have you not? Anyway, I also reached out to some friends and asked them if they would send their experiences with knitting ruts to share with you. So you will get to hear those over the next few clips. And yeah, this is a really fun experiment. I'll come back afterwards to just wrap it up and say our farewells.
Hey Haley, this is Becky from A Hand Knit Letter on Instagram and YouTube. This is my sexy morning voice, so you're welcome. As far as knitting ruts are concerned, I usually get into a rut because of external factors, usually stress or some difficult situations that come up in life, which I guess is still stress. But how I get out of the rut is usually looking at Ravelry. I'll browse through patterns till I find something that sparks my interest, and then I'll go down the rabbit hole of what kind of yarn I would need for that and what colors I would knit it out of. And then generally I'll search the internet for that yarn. I don't necessarily buy those things or even buy the pattern, but it gets me excited about knitting again. It's like window shopping.
Hey, this is Emily. I'm the botanical knitter. What gets me in a knitting rut is perfectionist tendencies. I struggle with having the yarn and wanting to find the perfect way to use the yarn because it's so hard to get and it was a limited release, or if the pattern isn't perfect and then I feel frozen, or the fit isn't perfect and it's like this paralyzing thing that I continue to struggle with. So I think I work through it by, if I wanted something to be quote unquote perfect, I could buy it, which I don't. I want handmade, right? Because isn't that unique and perfect in its own imperfect way? I don't know. It sounds cheesy, but that's the mindset I've been trying to shift to. And then also just any positive feedback that I get from people who interact with me on the social, like my knitting friends, my fiber friends, like all of that really helps me get through a rut too. So perfect is overrated. Happy knitting.
Hello, this is Allie from Allie Makes Everything on YouTube, and I'm really interested in this concept of the knitting rut because I think that for me, I think of knitting as the thing that I just do more of when I'm in a rut from other things. Like, I don't think I've experienced a knitting rut. I kind of always want to knit, but on the other hand, I've only been knitting for 2 years, so I feel like there are 3 possibilities here. Like, number 1, maybe I'm just not a person who's susceptible to knitting ruts. Number 2, maybe something that I'm doing is preventing them. Or number 3, it's still coming for me and it just hasn't happened yet. So I'm trying to think, like, I think that I'm generally a pretty monogamous knitter, but I think that the exception to that is if I've got something like pretty complex in the works for like a significant amount of time. So like in that case, I would tend to then also start something that's a little more mindless because I do love to just sit in it stockinette. So I'm wondering if maybe the thing that I would get stuck on is if I only had something complicated to work on, and like there would definitely be times where I just didn't feel up to working on that, and so maybe that's where I would then fall into a rut, but just because I know I like to knit stockinette, I kind of tend to have something available. So maybe that's what's been preventing it. Or maybe 6 months from now, I'm going to be watching this video looking for help because I'm in my first knitting rut and I don't know how to get out of it. So time will tell.
Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me today in this little mini episode. I am going to get back to my I-cord edge on my artist shawl, and I will see you guys in the next whip update, which will be sometime toward the beginning or middle of April. I hope you guys are well, and I'll talk with you next time.